Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing stories of personal transformation and collective healing from people who have been touched by cancer. My name is Claire DeLasso, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. Jade Sherer has devoted her life to showing up for people as they navigate life transitions big and small. For more than 20 years, she's been a guide for nature-based transformation and a holder of ceremonies, as well as a mentor to hundreds of people as they listen for what's next in their lives. Jade sees soul work and mindful self-reflection as crucial to community building, planetary care, and justice for the creatures of Earth. Jade is in the midst of writing her first book and lives with her four-legged significant other amidst the boulders of Prescott, Arizona. Hi, Jade. Welcome to Cancer Talks.
Hi, Claire. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So maybe we could start with what drew you to say yes to being on the podcast.
Yeah, well, what I know about when I found out I had cancer was that I was immediately, almost fiercely drawn towards needing and wanting to hear stories of healing that other people had that they were holding in their lives that were not typically what I was finding in mainstream media or the mainstream books. And I was so drawn and hungry to hear stories of people who went beyond cancer. And so I think that's part of, I have been very happy to have conversations with anybody and everybody about my story, because I feel like it gives hope to people who think it's just, so many people, including myself, think that cancer is a death sentence. And I believe that that's a misperception for many of us. So yeah, I'm glad for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great place to start. I don't think I've heard a guest say that the first hunger was other people's stories. A lot of people get the diagnosis and then go do research. But the first thing I think when they say that is more like, medical research, looking for ways of understanding what the disease is and treatment options, and just what a gift that you wanted to hear stories, because I think cancer and the cure is not, I mean, I don't know if there is a cure per se for cancer. It's this thing that a big bump in the road that changes everyone's life who has a diagnosis, but it is part of each person's story. It's part of the whole story of the whole life. And so, I mean, that's just such a blessing that you were drawn to hear about, whole people and whole stories, because I think there's a lot more comfort and hope there than there is in just reading, drug names and like reading through all that stuff, which can be very informative and important in terms of, patient empowerment. But what a great place to start.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I did some of that too, but I love what you brought up, Claire, because already this ping-ponging that's going on, because my work really in my life is listening to people's stories. So I never really put that together with this. But what happened for me was that I found Kelley Turner's book, Radical Remission. And as I started to read those stories, I was like, this is the medicine that I need. I need to know that there are a zillion possibilities, not just the one or two that mainstream medical world seems to want to put out. So.
Right. Yeah, and the comfort that seems most immediately available are these numbers about life expectancy. But then what's going on in those extra months that you might get to live, or what fills those days? How do those days feel? And what is the ecosystem of care that you have access to in those times? And there's so much more story.
Yeah. Yeah. And also how do we hold the journey? Because I was lucky enough to have a very dear friend who was diagnosed with breast cancer 21 years ago, I believe. And when she was one of my first go-tos, and she brought this really important distinction to my awareness. And that was that she said, there's a difference. She would always call me terms of endearment. Like, there's a difference, honey, between cure and healing. Healing and curing are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
You may not cure your cancer, but you have absolutely the possibility of healing something much deeper than the body.
Mm-hmm.
And I just loved that perception. It's like, well, that fits for who I am in my world, because I'm all about what we are deeper than the body or within the depths of the body. So, yeah, that was a gift.
Would you share a little bit about your work as it relates to the spiritual self and what you do? I know you've done a lot over the course of your life, but what are some of the um, modes of guidance that you're practicing right now?
Yeah, happy to. And some of this may seem really foreign to some people, and for others, it may drop right into a place of recognition that maybe you did or didn't know you had. But I do what I call nature-based soul work. And that word soul, I don't necessarily use that in a religious sense, but I use it more in terms of, I think of it as the deep river within us that takes us into our deepest shared humanity, where sorrow lives and longing lives and deep purpose lives, and even suffering and death. But more often, the focus is, who am I as a soul? Who am I as a person of the most genuine authenticity that I possibly can understand myself as? And we have always done this work in wild nature, because it is in wild nature where the mirror is clearest to us of who we are. Because when you think about it, in nature, nothing in nature is trying to be anything other than itself. It is naturally, authentically, genuinely itself. And so we take people into nature either for what we might call a vision quest, where people go out for generally 3 days and 3 nights to be alone in nature with the wild ones, and fasting, usually, and only drinking water, no food, so that we sort of strip away the societal and cultural mirror, so that we can sink more deeply into the truth of ourselves. And interestingly, for me, I have always called this a practice of, or a ceremony of practicing dying, which is so many religions encourage, is that when we can practice dying in our lives, we generally know how to live much more fully and truly. And so it has not been lost on me. Immediately when I got my diagnosis, which actually came by way of a dream told me to go to the doctor. And I just knew immediately that this was a part of my deepest story. There was something bigger in this story than simply getting cancer and surviving or not surviving. It was like, no, this is part of a big story here. And so I've always been tracking it in that way. And I'm so grateful for that, because it gave meaning and purpose to everything that happened around my health story in the last 3 years.
What, I don't know how to ask this question, but how do you describe that bigger story, or what are some maybe some relationships that are part of that story, or the other characters or the themes that are part of your story?
Mm-hmm. Well, how many hours
Yeah,
Um, well, let's see. Let me pull out a few threads. So one is definitely having to do with my relationship with the earth and the way in which I understand that we humans from the beginning were echoes of the earth. And we have lost a lot of that connection over time. And so that is a piece, as well as ancestrally, my connection with my mother and through the feminine line that needed some healing, I would say. And back to the earth piece in these days, in these times, this current time of so much upheaval and so much loss and extinction and climate catastrophe and all of that, I feel like here too, just like in my feminine line, there was a lot of heartbreak, is a lot of heartbreak, a lot of grief, as I have witnessed the death and dying. We all have. And so here was my story set inside of, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3 months before the pandemic really washed over our planet. And so there's a piece that I have also recognized in my own story for 20 some years around my relationship with death and dying, and that I think it's inherent in a person that has spent a lot of time in wild nature or any kind of nature, that you understand the systems of life and death and those cycles that are natural and important, actually, and we can't deny them. So along the way, 20 some years ago, I realized that I had to be a sort of apprentice to death. It was another time when I came close to my own mortality, and I was like, this is a relationship I need to have. I need to let it grow and understand it and come closer to it. I was almost going to say, learn how to not fear it. I can't say there isn't fear anymore. There is, but I have definitely been intentional. And in fact, a lot of my work now these days is a lot about joining hands with other people to find the courage inside to be willing to face death and dying and feel the grief of it and the gratitude around it for ourselves or our loved ones or for the planet and the animals and the plants, whatever might be in one's heart. But I have really turned my attention in that direction, even though I've been sort of doing this apprenticeship for 20 plus years. This is part of this meeting my diagnosis for cancer, and then the rest of the story that happened over the last 3 years. It just has felt like a continued beckoning from my soul to go deeper down into that river that is asking me to feel and to know and to understand our humanity with all of its fears and deaths and losses and dreams and images and all of that. So
in my own life and in this moment, I am relating really strongly to fear of death in the context of wounds in my own maternal ancestral line. So that stood out for me, and I don't know if you yet made a direct connection between fear of death and the maternal line healing that you've been doing, but I wonder if there is a relationship there, and I'm curious to hear.
I would say that piece was less connected directly with the fear of death, but more with the healing that needed to happen and the history of, I haven't ever quite said it like this before, Claire, but the history in my feminine line of women not having the ability or the quote unquote permission, thank you, patriarchy, to fully live their lives in the most abundant way that they possibly could. And then my own sort of soul contract, that's the way I look at it, with my mother, who I sort of latched on. Part of my wound story, I think it was that I understood, maybe even from pre-birth, that my task was to take care of her emotionally. Even though she probably would never have said that, that's
Mm-hmm.
how my body, mind, heart understood it. And so if it's okay, I'll tell you a little bit more of what transpired in the last 3 years, because
Please, yeah.
so November 2019, I have a dream. I had just come home from guiding a vision quest in Montana. Literally the next morning, I woke from a dream, and the dream told me in very clear terms. It was not metaphorical, it was a different quality. The dream told me I needed to see a doctor today. And in the dream, an x ray was being held up, an old fashioned x ray of my torso. And I woke up with my hand on my lower belly, and I could feel that there were masses in my belly. So
Whoa.
I went right ahead and made a doctor's appointment. And the short version is things transpired fairly quickly, and they couldn't diagnose without actually taking the tumors out, because
Yeah.
they no longer do needle biopsies. That's dangerous. So I went ahead, and the dream was in October. In November, we did surgery, and they took out both my ovaries were enshrouded with tumors. And when they biopsied them, when I was still under anesthesia, they were, yes, indeed, that is cancer. But the beautiful thing was they could find no other cancer in my body at that time. And they said, well, this is stage 1B, which is very unusual, I'm told, for ovarian cancer, because often there's very few symptoms and people don't find
Yeah.
it until stage 3 or stage 4. So I give a lot of prayer and thanksgiving to the mystery of dreams, and that world that is also a part of my work is like, what's in the invisible world that we are not paying attention to. So the dreams gave me a longer life, at least, and maybe saved my life. So time went on, COVID came in, and then about this time last year, I was walking in the forest with my dog, and I had symptoms of a heart attack. And I was like, that is really
Whoa.
strange. And so I came back, I waited a day or so, and then I was given a lot of encouragement to go into the ER, which I didn't want to do because it was high COVID
COVID.
season. And
Yeah.
but I did, and told them the story, and the EKG was all this stuff. But they were determined to keep me. They kept me for 5 days doing every test in the book,
Whoa.
and amazingly, they said, well, it's not the reason you had heart attack symptoms. That is probably due to something else. But they said, you have a leaky aortic valve and you need a valve replacement. And
Whoa.
um, they were like, we're going to take you into open heart surgery in 3 days. And I was like, no, I need time to prepare for this. So I went
Whoa.
home and did a lot of important preparation for myself and with my community. And at that time, my mother was, think about ovaries, feminine line,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. My mother had dementia, and her
Mm-hmm.
life had become really intolerable, and kind of just nothing kind or sweet about it anymore. So
Mm.
when I finally went into surgery, knowing they would be stopping my heart, and knowing the deep soul connection I had with her, my prayer was, I was like, please, if you have to stop my heart, could that somehow mysteriously help my mom to pass, because it's time and she wants to go and she's suffering. and
Whoa.
and so I had surgery on September 16th last year, and opened my chest up not once but twice because I was bleeding so much. So they went back in and pulled that sternum apart a second time.
Whoa.
But my mom passed 2 weeks later, and
Mm.
she was not aware that this was happening for me, not on the conscious level
Yeah.
anyway. But that all feels like part of the same story for me, or a larger story that is living inside of me. It was her death then. And at that time, sounds a little bit strange, and I can't even really explain what it was, what the difference was. But when I got the news that she had died, I had this very clear feeling in my heart that my contract or soul contract was complete with her. And
Mm,
because she had died, and whatever I had agreed to on some strange, mysterious, invisible level when I came in to life in this body was over. So it felt like a clearing to me somehow. And I
yeah.
had this sense that maybe I didn't have to keep having more events of facing my own mortality because she had passed. And it's hard to explain it, but that
Uh-huh.
feels like a
I
piece of
hear
the
it.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really, in my own maternal line, resonate with this thing you
Mm,
mentioned earlier of the, yeah, generations of women feeling like they can't live their fullest lives.
mhm,
Um, in my own family, in a way that feels directly related to sacrifice and loyalty and caretaking
mm,
for other family members.
mm,
And for my own mother, the reason I asked the earlier question is that there is a fear of other people's death that partly
uh,
drives that, or just this taking responsibility for the lives of others in a way that
mm,
limits your own resource, her own resource to get in touch with her desire and purpose.
mm. Yeah, so beautifully put, Claire. And it helps to bring more clarity into my story too. And it's, yes, her line, my mother came from a German ancestry, and the women's place was just to take care of others. And there is a way in which I have that in my bones, only it's less about physical caretaking and more about soul caretaking,
Mm-hmm.
which somehow feels better to me. But
Mm,
there's a piece of that, like I felt like during all of this, I live alone with my dog. I don't live alone.
mm-hmm.
I live with my dog. I don't
Yes.
live with any other humans. And so there was a way in which I had to get right with asking for help from my community. And that was another big piece of healing for me was,
Mm,
asking for my friends to show up in a certain kind of way. And I was actually fairly particular about it. And what I mean by that is, like, I asked my people, because I'm really blessed to have a lot of dear soul friends that I know through my work and around the planet. And I made it really clear that I preferred that people didn't give me advice unless I asked for it, because I knew that I had to sink deeply into my own intuition through this whole journey.
yeah.
And to be given too much advice felt like it would be confusing. And so I asked for help, and I also asked for that. And I also wanted people to be really responsible. I'm like, if you can't be there for me at a particular time in any particular way, please be true to yourself. That's really
Yeah.
important to me,
Mm,
because again, that takes me back to our mutual story of the feminine line. It's like, do not
yeah.
show up if you can't do that and be good to yourself at the same time. It
Mm-hmm.
felt so important to me. So many pieces of the story were woven in and continue to be woven into my story.
Yeah. Were you able to ask for that community care before your mother passed or only after?
No, throughout, through the cancer and
Yeah,
everything.
good.
Yeah. In fact, I'm a part of a small group here in Arizona, in the town I live in, Prescott. There was 5 or 6 of us, that one's a midwife, one's a hospice worker, one's a palliative care nurse, and myself in the work that I do. We created we call it the Arizona Death Care Resource, because what we saw was that as a community, as families, as in any community, there is a big need for education and consciousness to be brought around. How do we show up for each other in times of need, whether it's death or illness or grief?
Yeah,
Because most people are frightened of that and want to
part
avoid
of
it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we created a group and a website, and we're still working to sort of bring it into our community. But lucky me, I was like the poster child for our vision because we had just got our website up literally a month or two before. And then I got this cancer diagnosis,
Whoa.
and these
Let's put it
people,
into action. Yeah.
yes, and they showed up in such amazing ways and then brought in the larger community. And that was another piece that really helped me to heal. There were so many pieces, but these, my family all lives a distance away, and though they came after my surgery and during it, there were people that are my dearest friends here that came to the hospital with me, that took me to doctor's appointments, that were just at my side, and that was a lifesaver for
Mm.
sure.
I want to go back a few steps to the way you responded to my last question, which was, I think, shed some really important light on, even though your mother's passing was this moment of release for you, that, the community and that way of asking for support, that was a healing for your feminine line. I just think the way that that unfolded and the way you answered that question really is a good reminder that everything is gradual. It's even if when we have these moments of catharsis or shift, that also everything is taking time and everything is always in process, and it never happens really in one moment.
Yeah.
It's work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we are so much like nature, and there are cycles, and there's unfoldings and decay and birthing and growth. And for instance, I just got back last week. One of my sisters and I decided to go to the place in Wyoming where my mom was born. And suddenly, like, things just fell into place. It was very amazing. It was almost like an instinctual move. And people showed up in this little town of Elk Mountain, Wyoming. And the museum keeper was like, I'm going to help you find where the ranch was, where your mom was born in 1928. So we
Wow.
brought her ashes, and this small community came together and found this man that remembered the name and took us out to this ranch. This was just last week, where we could disperse
Wow.
her ashes. And so that was like even another final step that felt so healing. And it was just natural, and it unfolded in its own time. And, so what you're saying, I think, is really true. It's like when we don't move just from the mind, but let the whole
Mm-hmm.
body participate, we are natural beings, and things unfold as they will, with nature on board, and sometimes communities on board. It was just
Mm-hmm.
rather beautiful to see how that came into being. It wasn't planned really when we decided. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
decided we wanted to go to the place we had gone as a family, but also to that town. But I had no idea we would actually find her birthplace and bring the ashes. And so that was another piece. Yeah.
When I was hearing you tell that story just now, I didn't, not a lot of thought or idea response was coming to mind, but my heart started pounding a little bit. It got, yeah, warm in a way. It's a really
Mm,
nice
mm.
story.
Yeah, I think, there's an example of I think, the collective healing that can happen when we each take the risk to do our own healing, and we get back to the storytelling. It's like that book and everything I found of other people's stories. It's like, yeah, that gives us permission to trust something greater, or something deeper than what mainstream, medicine is going to tell us.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did not do, my doctor said, I recommend chemotherapy. And even my integrative doctor said that. And then I found out that he kind of had to say that for liability's sake. But I was like, here is where my connection with the earth came back in. I was like, I have always eaten everything organic. I love the earth so much. I cannot, and I've always felt like the earth, Claire, was my teacher about what it is to be truly feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not imagine I don't pour poison or pesticides or onto the earth, and I could not imagine doing that into my body. And so I had to choose no chemotherapy, even though, mainstream would tell you that's risky, and my
Mm.
doctors did. But I had to go with my deepest feeling and what I knew was true for me. And I chose not to. So I did everything natural after the surgery. And my doctor, my integrative doctor, just last week told me, he said, I think you've beaten the odds. I think you probably know the term NED, no evidence
Yeah.
of disease. And so he just told me last week I could probably pull back on my protocol, which I've been doing very consistently for 3 years almost. So I'm in a moment of celebration for that.
Yeah. Mm. When you made that choice, well, it almost seems like you couldn't have made any other choice given who you are, but but I wonder if it felt like the clarity was that you knew in your heart that you would be able to heal without the chemo, or if the clarity was an acceptance of whether you would live or die.
I think in the heat of the moment, it was the latter. I think
Yeah.
I was, I was like, if this is meant to kill me, then there's a lesson there, but I didn't. Now I think now, well, let's see, would I answer the same way? I just feel like right now I trust more the inherent possibility of the ways that we can heal with our minds and our hearts and our souls. But at that time, I was in the grips of the fear that comes to almost everyone, I think, when we get
Yeah.
a cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
But I was so sort of crazily devoted to understanding what my soul commitments were that I just had to, and having tracked my own story and so many others' stories over 20 plus years, that I had to be true to it. I had to be
Mhm.
true to that kind of ethical morality and deep love for who we are as natural beings on a planet that is not meant to drink poison.
Yeah.
And please, I know that it has saved lives, but for me personally, it was not what I could do. So
I'm curious in the way that you clearly relate to all of the non human, other than human life around us as, part of you. Right?
mm,
It sounds like you have a very deep connection to all forms of life. I wonder how you relate to the cancer or the potentials of cancer or that kind of life force inside your body. And
mm,
yeah.
yeah, thanks. You're very intuitive, Claire. I love the questions you bring, because that has all been, of course, a big question for me as well. And I've gone through sort of lots of permutations about how I
Mm-hmm.
feel about how I felt about cancer and how I feel about the fact that the numbers, the I'm sorry, I'm not getting the right word, but the frequency of cancer in our world now seems so high. And I've contemplated that a lot of like what's I mean, there's the very real factual pieces about nutrition and the amount of healthy food we have available to us because of
Yeah.
our soils and all of that. But on a deeper, more spiritual or soulful level, I'm really curious about how it's a mirror for the way in which we are isolating ourselves from one another and from the earth. And I mean, even myself, it's like I feel deeply connected to so many people, but on a physical level, I live with my dog, and
Mm.
and so I'm curious about what cancer is up to, but also what I felt really strongly about in my own journey was that I was not holding it as a battle or something to kill or to destroy, but what was the relationship that was meant to be by it showing up in my body. And the
Yeah.
main vision that I tried to hold for myself and did some guided meditations for others and myself was to visualize that the inside of my body was a healthy ecosystem, just like what we might find on the planet, outside in nature, and that there was a few too many predators in there that weren't healthy at the moment. So I would visualize like a very verdant green jungle like ecosystem with water flowing through it. And that was my visualization often, was just like restoring health to the ecosystem, both for my body and for the planet. It's like we again are mirrors, and we need that in both places, the planet and the bodies. And so I'm left with a lot of mystery around what cancer is up to, but I do absolutely feel like it comes as a teacher, and sometimes a harsh one, and a guide, almost a portal. It's like it brings me back to the way that I like to hold my work. What my Vision Quest work is like, we have to practice dying. And for some of us, it might be to actually die. But we are in such a time of loss that for the more of us that can look our mortality in the face, I think the more compassion and love and kindness we might have for others and for the planet and the animals, as well as making choices for a more meaningful life, a life of purpose and well-being and gifting to others. And what do I have to give to others, rather than just this consumptive culture that we seem to be in the midst of. So I feel like, man, cancer is a fierce teacher, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And apparently I want to trust it. Apparently we need that kind of a teacher.
Yeah. Was there a personification of the predator of cancer that you imagine? Like, was there a particular animal or microbe or anything that you, like, if there's this lush forest inside you, who was the cancer?
Well, so I'll tell you a little story. So actually, often what I thought of was coyote, but not because I think coyote is something to be destroyed. It was coyote because I have found dead coyotes numerous times that I have tended to and given ceremony to, but also because of our relationship in our culture with coyotes. So many people think that they are these terrible beings that are to be eradicated, just like cancer. And really, if they're held like anything, any predator, any animal, prey or predator, if our ecosystems are healthy, things are living in balance, and we need predators, and we need them to kill, because otherwise the prey gets up, there's too many of them. So for some reason, that was often what I thought of a lot, because I kept being shown that in nature. I had found a coyote that had just been shot. I found a coyote that seemed to have dropped dead in its tracks in the snow. I've found lots of coyote bones. So I've been watching that over the last forever, but the last number of years. And now what nature's showing me more and more is I'm seeing more vibrant, healthy. Just the other day, 2 coyotes cruised right in front of my car. And yesterday, when I was walking here in town, I was walking my dog, and I came upon a woman coming my way, and she said, "A coyote just crossed behind you." And so they're healthy and around, and they're the trickster. So that also speaks to me, is like tricksters are teachers. And so I feel like there's some relationship there, and I love that you asked that question. So thank you.
I want to ask a question that's inspired by Sophie Strand, who's a writer based in the Hudson Valley. And part of the work that she does is putting stories in their ecosystems. And I know that you spend a lot of time in lots of different ecosystems far away from other people, but I really want to know what ecosystem your home is in, and what do you see every day, and what plants and animals are home for you, and just you describe your ecosystem.
Well, where I live now is the high desert, and that does seem to be my soul home, even though I was born and raised in Iowa. Very different. But once I've lived in a lot of different places. I've lived in Hawaii and California and Oregon and Washington, and keep returning to, well, I returned to Utah and then now I'm back here in Arizona. And so there's something about the vast, open, raw, this just feels soulful to me. The landscape, particularly canyon lands, are, it feels like the labyrinth of the soul, the way in which the erosion that happens that creates a beautiful canyon shows the stories of our life. It's like if you can imagine a body or a life like a canyon and you cut down through it, you get to see all the layers of everything that has changed us and moved us. And, Coyote is very much alive and well there, and
Yeah.
as are mountain lions and deer and all kinds of little creatures that are smaller, but the chipmunks and the bobcats and the squirrels and lots of raptors and owls. Owl was such an attendant for me, both in the stories that came in from my people, but around my heart surgery, it was September, so all my windows are open at night, just like now. And for weeks around my heart surgery, an owl was close enough to my home that I would hear it hooting for hours in the night. And I just love that because so many people, there's an association with death with owls in some indigenous cultures. And for me, it just was like an attendant around this possibility of death, around meeting my own. I was, for all intents and purposes, with open heart surgery, you're dead for a little while they
Yeah.
stop your heart. So
Wow.
owls are definitely in this ecosystem. And, there's definitely your prickly plants and cactuses and plants that have found ways to survive in the heat of the desert. But there's also some amazingly lush places. And we've had some great rain this monsoon season. So it's a
Wow.
little bit of the beauty of both worlds. There's some green, lush waterways still running, and yet we're in the high desert for sure. I have granite and sandstone boulders that are all in my backyard, and I just love them. There's something about that when I look out across the landscape of the desert that's canyon like and sandstone formations, it feels uh, otherworldly, like deeper than the human world. It just opens my heart to something that is beyond the rational, the linear, the mental, and invites me into other worlds, really.
Mhm.
I guess I'm just made for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
I want to tell you too, though, Claire, if I can, because I lived for a while, and this was part of my story too. I lived for a while in Washington State, and it was really in the midst of this, what I called my apprenticeship to death. And it was uncanny what started happening around me, deaths of animals. And then the founder of this ranch that I was living on died unexpectedly. And I was
Mm.
there for his death and did
Wow.
CPR and all of that. But his dream had been to create a green cemetery on this land where he runs kids' horse camps and so on. And so myself and four others that lived there decided, well, this is what we're going to do. And the man in town who owned the mortuary said, we can put Ray's body in the deep freeze while you get the legalities done so that he can be buried on this land that he loved so deeply.
Wow.
So we went to work and created not just a green cemetery, it was actually classified as a conservation burial ground, and it's alive and well now. This place in South Central Washington called White
Beautiful.
Eagle Conservation Burial Ground. And so we were able to bury him in April. He died in December, and we buried him on this land and created this beautiful cemetery so that our last act isn't one of using fossil fuels or, other things that are in the cemetery business, big business,
Yeah.
but instead to lay our bodies into the arms of our earth mama and be food for her as our last act. And so that's where I will be buried whenever that time comes. And that landscape too, though it is in Washington, is like high desert as well. And
Oh, wow. I didn't know there was high desert in Washington.
well, I don't know if they would classify it as that, but it's east of the Cascades. Yeah, it's east of the Cascades, so it definitely is hot and open like that, but has its forests too. So that was another interesting piece of this whole crazy story that I'm living out.
Wow. And I want to return to your soul work, and there have been lots of different threads, but I want to just ask the question, how did cancer change your relationship to the soul work that you do with others and that emotional caretaking that is a certain permutation of your self?
The deepest strand is the same in terms of the soul work. I am actually offering programs now and mentoring opportunities that are directly related to death and dying and grief. And in fact, I did one on the land where that cemetery is in May, and I called it Looking into the Face of Death. And we had a full program, and I always learn so much when I get to facilitate programs. And what I found was that people seem to be very hungry now for guidance and reflection time around that subject of death and dying and grief. And whether it's intuition or simply paying attention to what's going on in the world, or was it COVID, I don't know. But what we really noticed quite tangibly was that, see, we got to put people out for wanders out on the land of the cemetery, where right now I believe that there's 110 people buried there or something. And sometimes you don't even know where the grave is because they don't have a lot of markers, but it's 20 acres of very healthy ecosystem. And so we brought our people out there, and we would send them out with a particular invitation, and they would go out and wander for an hour or two and then come back with their stories. And there was lots of opportunity for people to express their grief. And what we noticed by the last day, it was a 5-day program, was that people were so joyful because they got up to date with their grief. So many of us have stuffed our grief away and do not want to touch it. And people were very joyous to have come together in support of one another to do this sometimes really scary work of looking at our own mortality. And so my work is really, I'm finding myself really pulled strongly towards working with people in that vein, and how is that woven into their particular soul stories. And that feels like, Claire, I feel like actually this being able to do this work is a part, it's my reason for living right now. And I think that in turn has given me healing to be really clear about what I'm called to do right now for as many days as I have left on the planet, and the planet has left, and the humans have left, to be there to help people face the losses that we are all facing, and to do it, to bring gratitude and love for the planet forward in this time when big change is upon us. And so my work is well suited, and it was really easy to sort of shift the trajectory just slightly to put some emphasis there. And people that I've guided over the years know my story, and so maybe they trust what I've gone through a little bit and have come enthusiastically so far to that. So
yeah, there's a moment, there's something happening this year, I'm sure beyond this year, forward and back too. But as Cancer Talks, we've also really leaned toward conversations about grief just in this year. And I think you reached out in the context of our community workshop on being with grief with Sasha Sora, who also had a different but related movement practice that tilted toward the grief conversation in the last few years. And
Yeah.
you're not alone.
Yeah, it's so important. I love that she was doing that and that more and more people are showing up as kind of midwives to grief and to death and dying and to the earth, being hospice workers for the earth and showing up. It's like it takes courage and it's so beautiful. I can tell you that I have watched enough people in their movement towards that turns out to be so fulfilling and nourishing to them that it's a beautiful thing. You know, I think there's this course correction around our relationship with death that is so necessary right now because we demonize it and it's like, well, death is not that different than birth. It's just the other end. And yes, there's loss and we grieve our own death and others, but I want to hold death as a magical doorway into something more. And I'm so hungry for I'm learning from a Buddhist teacher right now who has been diagnosed with ALS, and she is teaching her way into her grave. It is quite amazing to really learn from her and the Buddhist teachings about what to expect and how do we navigate this as best we can. Not that we get to control our deaths, but when that time comes, you know, how can we best be with it? And so I just feel super grateful that cancer came, that my heart surgery came. You know, I didn't like it at the time and I was terrified and all of that. But I also feel like it was a great director in my orchestra that has changed the music just enough that I feel even more on purpose than I ever have. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would add one more thing to that too, that maybe I just want to hear myself say it.
Say it.
Is that the way in which I had to take a stand for myself and be my own advocate, even in the face of people saying, no, you shouldn't do that. That's a death sentence, was really potent for me in terms of trusting my own deepest values and trusting that I could take a stand for something different than what mainstream might be suggesting to me. And that was a powerful act for me because there have been times in my life where I might have decided to go with the status quo or what I was told by a doctor who must know better than me. And it was powerful to say, no, this is the way I'm doing this. It's my life. And you don't get to tell me how long I'm going to live or not live by whatever you think I should be doing. You know, it's like, no. So that goes back again as well to the feminine line. My mother was very meek. She would never stand for herself. And so that was a piece of it as well. And,
standing for yourself and for all the women in your history.
Claire, I'm so grateful you have helped me put some more pieces in place. You know, it takes time, like you said, for things to be put together or to fall apart or to find their place. And always, day by day, it feels like more pieces are being put together in my puzzle. And I really appreciate this conversation that has helped me do that even more.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review in your podcast app. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. Write to us at info@cancertalks.com if you have a story to share. If you'd like to be in community with other cancer thrivers seeking personal transformation, join us for free workshops on Zoom. Visit cancertalks.com/Zoom to register. If you're moved to donate, please visit cancertalks.com/donate.